24. So notice how they're telling you that these two are congruent, which means, well, nonetheless, if you notice that this angle here is 90 degrees because it opens up to half of the circle. It opens up to the diameter. And so, which makes it a 45, 45, 90, which means if this is 4, this is also 4, and the diameter itself should be 4 square roots of 2. So what I'm using here is the fact that it's a 45, 45, 90, which means x root 2. And so here, JL, or 24, is 4 square roots of 2. Or if you want to do this in a decimal way, it's around 5.66. Now, 24 is asking us for two things. It's asking us for the circumference as well. So remember, circumference can be written as two ways, 2 pi r, or diameter times pi. Now, because I already have the diameter, I'm going to write it 3 ways. So I'm going to write it 4 root 2 times pi, or 5.66 times pi, or if I put all of this in the calculator, I also get 17.78. Alright, moving on to 25. 25, notice that from here to here, this represents the radius, which means that if I slide it over a little bit, that also represents the radius. Radius does not change. And so, because this chord is perpendicular to the radius, that means that these two distances are going to be exactly the same. And so once again, here I'm going to use Pythagorean theorem, where we have A, B, and C. And I'm going to figure out what A is by, So I'm going to figure out what A is. So I have A is equal to the square root of whatever 25 minus 7 squared is. Put it in the calculator, and I get A to be 24. And so if A is 24, I'll use a different color. So A is 24. That means this part over here is also 24, which means X is actually 48. So 26, we have our angle outside. And so the equation that I'm going to use is my outside angle, which is 45, is equal to 1/2 the big arc. So in this case, the big arc is X minus the little arc, which is 30. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I want to get rid of this 1/2. And so I get rid of the 1/2 by multiplying by the reciprocal, or multiplying by 2 on both sides. So when I do that, this 45 becomes a 90, and I get rid of my 1/2, and I'm left with X minus 30. And the last step to do is add 30 to both sides, and I get X to be 120 degrees. Moving on to 27. So 27, my angle is inside. Now it's not in the middle, it's not central, okay? So it's not a central angle. And we know it's not a central angle because these two are not the same, okay? And so the equation I'm going to use here is my inside angle, which is 55, is equal to 1/2 the two arcs, the sum of the two arcs that it intersects. So here it's intersecting arc 80 and arc X, and we're going to solve for X. So just how we did on the other one, I have to get rid of the 1/2. And so to get rid of the 1/2, I multiply both sides by 2. So on the left side, I get 110, and I get rid of my 1/2, and I'm left with 80 plus X. Last step is subtract 80 on both sides, and I get an answer of X equals 30 degrees. So once again, here I have an exterior angle, and so I have to figure out what the measurement of this arc is first before I continue. And in order for me to do that, I recognize that a full circle is 360 degrees. And I know that this arc here measures 125, so I subtract 125 from 360, and it gives me the arc measure of 235. And I'm going to use that to solve for x. So we have x equals half of the big arc, which is 235, minus the little arc, which is 125. And we get an answer of 110, and half of 110 is 25. I'm sorry, not 25, 55. And in this case, it's going to be 55 degrees. 29. So notice how angle 29, doesn't matter what it is, angle 29 is an inscribed angle, which means it's going to be half of that angle there. So the first thing we do is figure out what is half of 130. So to find half of 130, we simply divide it by 2. And so we have 65 degrees is the measurement of that angle. And so because the measurement of that angle is 65, and they're telling us that it's defined as 4x minus 5, we have to solve for x. So the first step is we add 5 on both sides, and we get 70 is equal to 4x, and then we divide by 4 on both sides, and we get x to be 17.5 or 17 and a half. 17.5. So moving on to 30. So notice how A, E, and C are all outside, and they're going to be tangent to the circle, which means that this is going to be congruent to that side. This side is going to be congruent to this side, and this side here is going to be congruent to that side. So with that being said, we can go ahead and fill out some of these sides. So if B to C is 7, we know C to D is also 7, and D to E is 3, F to E is also going to be 3. Sorry, I'm trying to color code for you. And lastly, we don't really know the measurement of these sides, but we do know that they're equal to each other. So we're going to set up an equation to be able to solve for x so we can find the dimensions. So 2x plus 5 equals 4x minus 3. So I'm going to subtract 2x from both sides and add 3 to both sides. On the left side, the x's cancel. On the right side, the 3's cancel. On the left side, I'm left with 8. On the right side, I got 2x divided by 2, and I get x to be 4. Now, if x is 4, to find the measurement, I simply plug x in here. So 4 times 4 is 16, minus 3 is 13. And so a to f is 13, and if we plug in 4 in there, 4 times 2 is 8, plus 5 is also 13. And so to find the perimeter, all we got to do is add up all of these sides. So we got 13 plus 13 plus 3 plus 3 plus 7 plus 7. That's 10, 20. So the perimeter is, we're going to get 46 units. Alright, moving on to 31. So 31, they're asking us to find the value of x. X measures this angle, and it's an inscribed angle, and which means that it's going to be half of the measure of this arc there. So we currently don't know that arc measure, but we can certainly find it. And the how we're going to find it is, notice how from here all the way to here, that's the diameter, which means 180. And so if I know that half a circle measures 180, and if I know this arc measures 80, I simply subtract it and I get 100. So this arc here measures 100, which means x has to be half of that, or 50 degrees. 32. So 32, it says find the value of x given these two inscribed angles. So you notice that I'm going to highlight this for you. U opens from R all the way to S. So it creates that arc. Whereas T, or angle T, is going to open up from S all the way to R. Now if you notice, they intersect the same exact arc. So yeah, it's going to be half the measure of that arc, but more importantly, these two are going to be congruent to each other. And so if we know they're congruent to each other, we set up our equation 3x plus 12 equals 5x, and we're going to solve for x. So subtract 3x on both sides, divide by 2, and we get x to be 6.